You'd think owning a cruise ship would be the ultimate luxury business. Buy a gigantic floating palace, divide it into beautiful suites, sell them to wealthy people, and let those owners live wherever the ship goes. The property moves. The ocean becomes the backyard. And because you're selling million-dollar residences instead of hotel rooms, it sounds like the economics should be incredible. But there's a problem. A cruise ship isn't really a building. It's a machine. And unlike a building, you can't simply turn off the elevators, close the restaurant, and wait for better economic conditions. The ship has to move. The engines have to run. The crew has to be paid. The hull has to be maintained. And every day that this enormous machine exists, money is leaving it, which creates the strange contradiction at the center of the entire business. The more luxurious the ship becomes, the more expensive it is to keep alive. And the people buying the luxury are often the very people who remove one of the ship's most important sources of revenue.
If a cruise ship is a machine and not a building, then what are you really paying for when you buy one?
Let's say you somehow acquire a large cruise vessel. The first thing you discover is that the purchase price isn't the real bill. The ship may already have cabins, restaurants, pools, theaters, and a gigantic engine room, but you're trying to create something different. You're trying to create a permanent 5-star residence. That means redesigned suites, private dining, medical facilities, luxury spas, more storage, more powerful internet infrastructure, higher-end kitchens, better soundproofing, premium furnishings. And suddenly, you're not just buying a ship, you're rebuilding a small city. Imagine spending hundreds of millions of dollars acquiring and transforming the vessel. Now imagine doing all of that without the revenue model that makes conventional cruising work.
You've spent a fortune rebuilding it into a floating palace. So how does a ship full of owners actually make any money?
Because a normal cruise passenger doesn't just buy a ticket. They buy drinks, excursions, casino chips, specialty restaurants, spa treatments, internet packages, photographs, shore experiences. Every time they swipe their room card, the cruise company can make more money. But what happens when the passenger owns the room? You can't repeatedly sell them the same cabin, and you can't rely on the same level of onboard spending. The ship has turned its customer from a recurring revenue source into a homeowner. That's great for the homeowner. It's a problem for the operator.
With the onboard spending gone, the costs don't stop. So what happens the moment this enormous machine leaves port?
And now we reach the part nobody notices when they're looking at the infinity pool. The ship has to move. Imagine a floating apartment building carrying several hundred residents. They wake up one morning and decide they want to be in Barcelona, then Monaco, then the Caribbean, then Alaska. Sounds amazing. But the engine doesn't care that the itinerary is beautiful. It only knows how much fuel is required to move tens of thousands of tons of steel through water. And fuel is one of those costs that doesn't scale nicely with luxury. You can charge someone $10 million for a suite, but that suite doesn't make the engine burn less fuel. In 2026, energy markets have also become a particularly uncomfortable reminder of this problem. Oil prices have been volatile, with geopolitical disruptions capable of moving marine fuel economics dramatically in a matter of days. Now imagine you're running a floating residential community and residents vote to change the itinerary. You don't just change a hotel reservation, you change fuel consumption, art schedules, logistics, waste handling, supplies, and docking fees. A slightly different route can mean hundreds of additional nautical miles, which means more fuel, more emissions, more time, and potentially another expensive port call. This is why commercial shipping companies obsess over route optimization. A ship's itinerary isn't just a travel plan, it's a financial equation. And then there's the environmental transition. LNG can reduce certain emissions, but it requires specialized infrastructure and creates its own fuel and supply chain considerations. Methanol is increasingly being considered as another pathway, particularly as the industry searches for lower carbon fuels. But converting an existing vessel isn't like replacing a car's engine. Fuel systems, storage, engines, safety systems, bunkering infrastructure, and port availability all become part of the equation. So the ship you're buying today isn't simply an asset. You're also buying exposure to whatever the energy system looks like 10 or 20 years from now. And that's before the ship reaches port. Because every time this enormous object arrives somewhere, someone wants to get paid. Port charges, passenger fees, environmental levies, toiletage, tug assistance, waste disposal, security, local taxes, and increasingly, environmental rules can make inefficient ships more expensive to operate. The ship may be floating in international waters, but financially, it is never really free.
Fuel and ports quietly drain the ship at sea, but what's the most expensive thing on board that isn't made of steel?
And then comes the most expensive thing on board that isn't made of steel. People. Luxury isn't just marble. Luxury is labor. If you want a resident to be able to order breakfast at 7 a.m., have their suite cleaned, get a massage at noon, eat at a fine dining restaurant at night, and still expect someone to fix a problem at 2 a.m., somebody has to be working. A normal apartment building might have a handful of employees. A luxury ship can require hundreds, and ultra-luxury operations can approach staffing levels where there is roughly one crew member for every few guests, sometimes far higher depending on the service model. Now multiply that across an entire vessel. Housekeeping, chefs, waiters, engineers, electricians, doctors, nurses, security, deck officers, entertainment staff, IT specialists, laundry workers, maintenance technicians, and then the people managing all those people. Here's the paradox. Residents buy the ship because they want hotel-level service, but they also want ownership, and ownership creates expectations. If you're paying millions for a residence, you don't think like a hotel guest. You think like a shareholder. You ask why payroll increased, why the restaurant costs so much, why the ship needs another engineer, why the captain wants to change the route, why the maintenance budget doubled. And suddenly, the person complaining about a $50,000 annual increase in operating costs might be sitting inside a machine that burns enormous quantities of fuel every day. This creates a strange political system. The residents want more luxury. The operator wants lower costs. The engineers want maintenance. The accountants want reserves. And the captain wants to operate the ship safely. Everyone is technically working toward the same goal until someone sends the bill.
Everyone on board wants something different, so what happens when the single biggest bill of all finally arrives?
And that bill eventually arrives in the form of dry dock. This is where the floating real estate dream becomes particularly uncomfortable. Ships need regular inspections, structural examinations, and periods out of the water for maintenance. Depending on the vessel, flag state, and approved inspection regime, passenger ships can face multiple bottom inspections and dry docking requirements over a 5-year cycle. And when a cruise ship enters dry dock, it isn't just getting a car wash. The hull can be inspected, propulsion systems examined, propellers serviced, pipes replaced, steel repaired, paint renewed, machinery overhauled, and problems that were invisible from the top deck suddenly become very visible underneath it. Imagine your ship generates, say, 10 million in resident fees over a period. Then it goes into dry dock. For weeks, residents aren't cruising. Restaurants aren't operating normally. Port revenue disappears. But payroll doesn't disappear. Insurance doesn't disappear. Debt payments don't disappear. And maintenance bills certainly don't disappear. Now imagine the engineers discover something unexpected. A corroded section. A propulsion problem. A damaged component that needs to be manufactured. A repair that takes 3 weeks instead of 3 days. The ship is suddenly making zero revenue from movement, while continuing to consume cash. This is the death spiral. A maintenance reserve that was supposed to protect the business gets consumed. The operator asks residents for a special assessment. Residents complain. Some refuse. Some sell. But selling creates another problem. If potential buyers see that owners are being hit with large assessments, the resale value of the residences falls. Now the ship's internal real estate market weakens. Lower prices make owners nervous. Nervous owners sell. More inventory appears. Prices fall further. And suddenly, the problem that started in the engine room has reached the real estate market. This is the feedback loop, mechanical problem. Higher maintenance bill, special assessment, owner dissatisfaction, lower resale values, more selling, lower confidence, harder financing, higher cost of capital, and less money available for the next repair. That's why financing this kind of business can be so difficult. A normal apartment building has land underneath it. The land isn't going anywhere. A conventional commercial property can often be refinanced against relatively understandable cash flows. A cruise ship is different. Its value depends on age, condition, regulation, fuel efficiency, market demand, and the cost of keeping it certified. And unlike land, a ship depreciates. Eventually, you're left with an enormous floating asset that is getting older every year, while the cost of maintaining modern luxury standards keeps increasing.
The numbers keep working against you. So what were you really buying all along?
Which brings us back to the original dream, the $1 million suite, the private balcony, the champagne, the ocean outside the window. The illusion is that you're buying real estate, but you're not really buying real estate. You're buying a tiny ownership claim inside a continuously operating industrial machine. And that distinction changes everything, because the luxury apartment isn't the product. The product is the system that keeps the apartment livable. The engines, the crew, the fuel, the ports, the kitchens, the sewage systems, the generators, the maintenance teams, the insurance. But insurance, the regulations, the dry docks, the logistics network, all of it has to work all the time. And that's the uncomfortable lesson. A cruise ship can look like a palace from the balcony, but financially, it's closer to an airline that happens to have bedrooms. It has enormous fixed costs, expensive machinery, constant maintenance, exposure to fuel prices, regulatory pressure, highly specialized labor, and almost no tolerance for extended downtime. The people buying the dream see the ocean. The operator sees the burn rate. And once you understand that, the question isn't really, could I afford to own a cruise ship? The more important question is, could I afford to keep one alive? Because in businesses built around giant machines, buying the asset is often the easy part. The difficult part is paying for everything it demands after the excitement of ownership is over. And perhaps that's the real illusion of the residential cruise ship. It isn't that you're buying a home that moves around the world. You're buying into a machine that must keep moving around the world just to remain a home.